Before we dive into this incredible story of aviation history, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. Your support helps us bring you more amazing World War II documentaries like this one. The year was 1940, and the skies over Europe painted a grim picture for Allied aviation. German Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s dominated aerial combat with their superior maneuverability and climb rates, while British Spitfires and Hurricanes struggled to match their performance at high altitudes. In the United States, Republic Aviation Corporation faced a monumental challenge that would define the future of American air power. Alexander Kartveli, the brilliant chief designer who had previously created the P-35 and P-43 Lancer, stood before a revolutionary concept that would reshape aerial warfare forever. The Army Air Corps had issued specifications that seemed almost impossible to achieve. They demanded a fighter capable of reaching speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, armed with at least 6 50-caliber machine guns, preferably 8, and equipped with armor protection that could withstand the punishment of modern aerial combat. Traditional fighter design philosophy emphasized lightweight construction and nimble handling characteristics, but combat reports streaming back from the European theater suggested that survival in the hostile skies required a fundamentally different approach. Kartveli's revolutionary vision centered around the massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, an 18-cylinder air-cooled radial power plant capable of producing 2,000 horsepower. This engine alone weighed more than entire fighter aircraft of the previous generation, but its reliability and power output promised unprecedented performance at high altitudes. The designer's most audacious decision involved the integration of a turbo supercharger system that would allow the aircraft to maintain full power even at altitudes approaching 40,000 feet, a capability that would prove decisive in the battles to come. The engineering challenges were staggering. The turbo supercharger system required hundreds of feet of carefully designed ducting that connected the supercharger unit near the aircraft's tail with the engine in the nose. This complex arrangement demanded that the entire aircraft be designed around the air intake system, with the massive ducting occupying nearly the entire belly of what would become the XP-47B prototype. The irony of this design decision would become apparent years later when post-crash analysis revealed that these same ducts often served as a protective barrier between pilots and the ground during emergency landings. Republic Aviation's proposal represented more than just another fighter aircraft. It embodied a complete philosophical shift in American fighter design. Where European fighters prioritized agility and lightweight construction, the American approach emphasized firepower, durability, and high-altitude performance. The planned armament of 8 50-caliber machine guns would deliver more firepower than any fighter aircraft in history, with a combined rate of fire exceeding 6,800 rounds per minute when all weapons were operational. The Army Air Corps, initially skeptical of the unconventional design, recognized the potential of Kartveli's vision and awarded Republic Aviation a contract for 171 P-47B aircraft in September 1940. The first prototype, designated XP-47B, began taking shape in Republic's Farmingdale, New York facility, where skilled craftsmen and engineers worked around the clock to bring this mechanical monster to life. The aircraft's distinctive semi-elliptical wing planform, inherited from Kartveli's earlier designs, would become one of the most recognizable silhouettes in aviation history. As 1941 dawned, the prototype neared completion, its massive proportions dwarfing every other single-engine fighter in existence. Standing 14 feet 8 inches tall with a wingspan of over 40 feet, the XP-47B resembled a heavyweight boxer among lightweights. The aircraft's empty weight of 10,000 pounds made it heavier than many twin-engine aircraft of the era, leading skeptics to question whether such a massive machine could possibly succeed in aerial combat against nimble European fighters. On May 6, 1941, test pilot Lowry Brabham advanced the throttles of the P-47B for its maiden flight. As the massive radial engine roared to life, generating vibrations that could be felt throughout the airfield, spectators witnessed the birth of what would become America's most produced fighter aircraft. The prototype lifted off from Republic's test facility, climbing steadily into the spring sky with a thunderous roar that would soon become synonymous with American air power across the globe. Initial test flights revealed both the promise and challenges inherent in the revolutionary design. The aircraft demonstrated exceptional high-altitude performance, with the turbo supercharger system allowing it to maintain power output well above 30,000 feet. However, the massive weight and complex systems required extensive refinement before the aircraft would be ready for combat operations. Engine cooling issues, radio interference from the ignition system, and landing gear problems plagued early development, requiring nearly 2 years of intensive testing and modification before the first combat-ready versions would roll off the production line. The evolution from experimental prototype to combat-ready fighter aircraft proved to be one of the most challenging development programs in American aviation history. Throughout 1941 and early 1942, Republic Aviation's engineering teams worked tirelessly to resolve the myriad technical issues that plagued the early P-47 variants. The complexity of the turbo supercharger system, while providing unprecedented high-altitude performance, introduced numerous reliability concerns that threatened to derail the entire program. Fuel system modifications, engine cooling improvements, and radio shielding upgrades consumed thousands of engineering hours as the company raced to deliver a combat-worthy aircraft. The decision to establish a second production facility in Evansville, Indiana, represented a strategic masterstroke that would prove crucial to the P-47's ultimate success. Mayor William H. Dress and prominent local businessmen, including C. Nelson Smith of Hoosier Lamp and Stamping Corporation and Louis A. Ruthenberg of Serval Inc., worked tirelessly to secure the federal contract that would bring aircraft manufacturing to their community. The Department of Defense selected Evansville due to its inland location, existing industrial infrastructure, and abundant skilled workforce, factors that would prove invaluable as production ramped up to meet wartime demands. Construction of the Evansville facility began on April 7, 1942, in what had previously been farmland adjacent to the regional airport. The urgency of wartime production schedules drove construction crews to work around the clock, completing the massive manufacturing complex 3 months ahead of schedule in August 1942. However, P-47 production began even before the factory was completed, with workers assembling aircraft components in rented garage spaces and temporary facilities throughout the city. This improvised approach to manufacturing demonstrated the remarkable adaptability and determination that characterized American industrial mobilization during World War II. On September 19, 1942, the first Evansville-built P-47, christened the Hoosier Spirit, lifted off from the newly completed factory airfield. Local newspapers covered the historic flight extensively, with crowds of workers and citizens gathering to witness the culmination of their collective efforts. The successful maiden flight marked the beginning of large-scale P-47 production that would eventually total over 6,242 aircraft from the Indiana facility alone. The Evansville plant's output would prove crucial in meeting the enormous demand for P-47s as American forces prepared for offensive operations in multiple theaters of operation. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, American fighter units in England awaited the arrival of their new mounts with a mixture of anticipation and skepticism. The 4th Fighter Group, composed largely of experienced pilots who had previously flown with the Royal Air Force's Eagle squadrons, represented the cream of American fighter talent. These veterans had honed their skills, flying nimble supermarine Spitfires, and were accustomed to the lightweight, highly maneuverable characteristics of British fighter aircraft. When the first P-47Cs arrived at their bases in December 1942, the pilots' initial reactions ranged from disappointment to outright disbelief. The sheer size of the P-47 shocked pilots accustomed to more conventional fighters. At over 36 feet in length and weighing more than twice as much as a Spitfire, the aircraft seemed more suited to ground attack missions than air-to-air combat. The spacious cockpit, while offering superior visibility and pilot comfort, felt cavernous compared to the intimate confines of European fighters. Pilots quickly dubbed the massive aircraft Juggernaut, a nickname that was soon shortened to the more affectionate Jug, a moniker that would stick throughout the aircraft's service life. Initial training flights revealed both the aircraft's potential and its limitations. The P-47's rate of climb disappointed pilots expecting fighter-like performance, as the massive weight required considerable time to reach combat altitudes. Radio interference from the powerful radial engine's ignition system hampered communication during formation flying, while early landing gear problems led to several accidents that further undermined pilot confidence. However, experienced test pilots began to appreciate the aircraft's unique characteristics, particularly its exceptional diving performance and remarkable stability as a gun platform. The P-47's armament system represented a quantum leap in fighter firepower that would revolutionize aerial combat. 8 Browning M2 .50 caliber machine guns mounted in the wings with 425 rounds per gun provided a total ammunition capacity of 3,400 rounds. This massive ammunition load allowed pilots to engage multiple targets during a single mission, a capability that would prove invaluable during the intense air battles that lay ahead. The convergence of all 8 weapons created a cone of destruction that could disable or destroy enemy aircraft with brief bursts of sustained fire. Training programs at bases throughout England focused on maximizing the P-47's unique capabilities while minimizing its limitations. Pilots learned to use the aircraft's exceptional diving performance to initiate combat engagements, trading altitude for speed and positioning advantage. The boom and zoom tactics that would become synonymous with P-47 operations emphasized hit-and-run attacks that avoided prolonged turning engagements where lighter, more agile opponents held the advantage. These tactical innovations would prove crucial as American pilots prepared to face battle-hardened Luftwaffe veterans in the skies over occupied Europe. As winter gave way to spring in 1943, the first P-47 squadrons completed their training programs and prepared for their combat debut. The aircraft that had initially generated so much skepticism was about to prove its worth in the most demanding test possible: aerial combat against Germany's finest pilots, flying some of the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world. The stage was set for a confrontation that would forever change the course of the air war over Europe and establish the P-47 Thunderbolt as one of the most feared weapons in the Allied arsenal. April 8, 1943, marked a pivotal moment in the history of aerial warfare as P-47 Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group roared across the English Channel on their first combat mission. Led by Colonel Donald Blakesley, a veteran of the Eagle squadrons who had already achieved ace status flying Spitfires, the formation of 12 P-47Cs climbed steadily toward their assigned patrol altitude over the French coast. The pilots, still adapting to their massive new mounts, maintained tight formation as they crossed into enemy territory, their thunderous radial engines announcing their presence to German radar operators monitoring the Channel approaches. The initial combat sorties revealed both the promise and challenges of operating the heavyweight American fighter in the European theater. German pilots, accustomed to engaging lighter British and American fighters, initially dismissed the lumbering P-47s as easy targets. Luftwaffe intelligence reports described the Thunderbolt as unsuitable for sustained fighter operations, characterizing it as slow to climb and cumbersome in turning engagements. This initial underestimation would prove to be a costly mistake, as German pilots discovered the devastating effectiveness of the P-47's unique combination of firepower, durability, and high-altitude performance. The first significant aerial engagement involving P-47s occurred on April 15, 1943, when elements of the 78th Fighter Group encountered a formation of Focke-Wulf 190s over the Netherlands. The German pilots, confident in their aircraft's superior maneuverability, initiated a series of turning engagements that should have favored their lighter, more agile fighters. However, the American pilots had learned to exploit their aircraft's strengths, using diving attacks and superior firepower to offset their disadvantages in turning performance. The engagement resulted in 3 confirmed German aircraft destroyed for the loss of 1 P-47, a favorable exchange ratio that would improve dramatically as pilots gained experience with their new aircraft. Early combat operations exposed several critical limitations that threatened to undermine the P-47's effectiveness. The aircraft's limited range, approximately 375 miles with internal fuel, severely restricted its ability to escort bomber formations deep into German territory. This limitation became particularly problematic as the 8th Air Force began launching daylight bombing raids against targets in central Germany, beyond the range of existing escort fighters. German fighters learned to avoid combat until the P-47s reached their fuel limits and were forced to return to base, leaving the bomber formations vulnerable to concentrated attacks during the most dangerous portions of their missions. The psychological impact of the P-47's presence over European battlefields began to manifest itself in subtle but significant ways. German pilots reported an almost visceral reaction to the distinctive sound of approaching Thunderbolts, describing the thunderous roar of their radial engines as uniquely menacing. The sheer size of the American fighters, visible from considerable distances, created an impression of overwhelming power that affected German pilot morale even before combat was joined. Ground observers noted that Luftwaffe pilots seemed more cautious when P-47s were present, often breaking off attacks prematurely or avoiding engagement altogether when outnumbered. The first major test of P-47 durability came during a mission over France on May 4, 1943, when a Thunderbolt, piloted by Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, survived an encounter that would have destroyed any other single-engine fighter of the era. Johnson's aircraft absorbed over 200 hits from German machine guns and cannon, including 21 20mm cannon strikes that should have been immediately fatal. The P-47's robust construction, built around the massive radial engine and reinforced with armor plating, allowed the aircraft to continue flying despite damage that would have brought down a liquid-cooled fighter. Johnson's survival became legendary among Allied air crews and provided dramatic evidence of the Thunderbolt's exceptional ability to absorb battle damage. German pilots began to report disturbing encounters with P-47s that seemed virtually indestructible. Luftwaffe ace pilots, accustomed to achieving quick victories against Allied fighters, found themselves expending enormous amounts of ammunition against Thunderbolts that refused to go down. The air-cooled radial engine, lacking the vulnerable coolant systems of liquid-cooled fighters, continued operating even after sustaining multiple hits that would have immediately disabled a Messerschmitt or Focke-Wulf. This durability forced German pilots to close to extremely dangerous ranges to achieve decisive hits, exposing themselves to the devastating firepower of the P-47's 8 machine guns. The development of effective tactics took several months as American pilots learned to maximize their aircraft's strengths while minimizing its weaknesses. The Thunderbolt sweep became a standard formation tactic, with flights of 4 aircraft operating at different altitudes to provide mutual support and maximize coverage of assigned patrol areas. Pilots learned to use their superior diving performance to initiate attacks, building up tremendous speed before engaging enemy formations and using that speed to disengage if the tactical situation became unfavorable. These hit-and-run tactics proved highly effective against German pilots who were trained to engage in prolonged turning fights where their aircraft's superior maneuverability provided decisive advantages. By the summer of 1943, the P-47's reputation among German pilots had undergone a complete transformation. What had initially been dismissed as a lumbering target had become recognized as a formidable opponent that demanded respect and careful tactical consideration. Luftwaffe training programs began emphasizing specific techniques for engaging Thunderbolts, warning pilots about the aircraft's exceptional diving performance and devastating firepower. The psychological impact of facing an apparently indestructible opponent began to affect German pilot performance, with many veterans reporting increased stress and reduced confidence when P-47s were present in their operational areas. The introduction of external fuel tanks in late 1943 transformed the P-47 Thunderbolt from a short-range interceptor into a long-range escort fighter capable of accompanying bomber formations deep into the heart of Nazi Germany. The development of 75-gallon belly tanks and later 108-gallon tanks extended the aircraft's range to over 800 miles, finally providing the 8th Air Force with the escort capability necessary to conduct daylight bombing operations against strategic targets in central and eastern Germany. This range extension fundamentally altered the dynamics of the air war over Europe, as German fighters could no longer simply wait for escort fighters to depart before launching their attacks on bomber formations. The first long-range escort missions revealed the P-47's exceptional capabilities at high altitude, where its turbo-supercharged engine maintained full power even above 30,000 feet. German interceptors, particularly the Messerschmitt Bf 109, experienced significant performance degradation at these altitudes, while the Thunderbolt remained fully capable of aggressive combat maneuvering. This altitude advantage allowed P-47 formations to position themselves above German interceptors, using diving attacks to achieve tactical surprise and exploit their superior firepower before disengaging. The psychological effect on German pilots of having American fighters appear suddenly from above, diving at tremendous speeds with guns blazing, cannot be overstated. Major Eugene Roberts of the 78th Fighter Group developed innovative escort tactics that maximized the P-47's protective capabilities while maintaining formation integrity. The Roberts weave positioned P-47 flights in a continuous crisscrossing pattern above and around bomber formations, ensuring that at least one flight was always in position to intercept attacking German fighters. This tactic proved particularly effective against the head-on attacks favored by Luftwaffe pilots, as the weaving P-47s could quickly reposition to meet threats from any direction. The sight of multiple P-47 formations, weaving protectively around bomber streams, became one of the most recognizable tactical formations of the European air war. The psychological warfare aspect of P-47 operations extended beyond individual aircraft encounters to encompass entire operational theaters. German ground controllers monitoring radar screens learned to recognize the distinctive formations and flight patterns of P-47 escorts, often reporting their presence with terms that conveyed both respect and apprehension. The German radio intercept service documented numerous instances of Luftwaffe pilots requesting permission to abort missions when P-47s were reported in their operational areas, a request that would have been unthinkable during the early war period when German pilots dominated European skies. This shift in pilot confidence reflected the growing recognition that engaging P-47 formations carried exceptional risks with uncertain rewards. The development of specialized ammunition types further enhanced the P-47's lethality against German aircraft. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds proved devastatingly effective against the fuel systems of German fighters, often triggering spectacular explosions that demoralized other German pilots in the formation. The psychological impact of watching comrades' aircraft disintegrate in massive fireballs created lasting trauma among German air crews, many of whom developed what medical officers termed combat fatigue, specifically related to P-47 encounters. The combination of devastating firepower and psychological intimidation made the P-47 a uniquely effective weapon in the psychological warfare campaign that accompanied physical combat operations. German intelligence services began conducting detailed studies of P-47 capabilities and tactics in an effort to develop effective countermeasures. These reports, preserved in Luftwaffe archives, reveal growing respect and concern for the American fighters' impact on German operational effectiveness. One particularly detailed analysis, prepared for fighter group commanders in early 1944, warned that the American Thunderbolt represents a fundamental shift in the balance of air power over Europe, and recommended avoiding engagement except under the most favorable circumstances. Such recommendations represented a complete reversal of earlier German assessments that had dismissed the P-47 as an ineffective opponent. The escort missions of 1944 established the P-47's reputation as the premier long-range fighter of the European theater. The aircraft's ability to maintain formation integrity during long flights, engage effectively in combat, and return safely to base despite battle damage made it indispensable to the strategic bombing campaign. Statistics from the 8th Air Force reveal that bomber formations escorted by P-47s experienced significantly lower loss rates compared to unescorted missions, with some heavily escorted raids achieving loss rates below 1% despite penetrating deep into defended German airspace. These remarkable success rates validated the American investment in long-range escort fighters and demonstrated the effectiveness of the P-47's unique combination of capabilities. The psychological dominance achieved by P-47 formations became evident in German pilot memoirs and post-war interviews. Luftwaffe veterans consistently described encounters with Thunderbolts in terms that emphasized the aircraft's intimidating presence and devastating effectiveness. Many pilots reported experiencing physical symptoms of stress when P-47s were detected in their operational areas, including increased heart rate, sweating, and difficulty concentrating on other tactical considerations. This physiological response to the presence of P-47s represented a form of psychological conditioning that significantly degraded German pilot performance even before combat was initiated. By mid-1944, the P-47's dominance of European skies had become so complete that German fighters rarely attempted to intercept heavily escorted bomber formations during daylight hours. The sight of multiple P-47 formations weaving protectively around bomber streams had become synonymous with American air power, representing an almost impenetrable shield that few German pilots dared to challenge. This tactical dominance marked the beginning of the final phase of the air war over Europe, as the Luftwaffe gradually withdrew from daylight operations in the face of overwhelming American fighter superiority. The evolution of the P-47 Thunderbolt from air superiority fighter to ground attack specialist represented one of the most significant tactical developments of the European air war. Beginning in late 1943, P-47 units began experimenting with fighter-bomber missions that would exploit the aircraft's exceptional ordnance-carrying capacity and remarkable durability under fire. The installation of underwing pylons capable of carrying bombs, rockets, or auxiliary fuel tanks transformed the Thunderbolt into a versatile multi-role aircraft that could perform both escort duties and ground attack missions during a single sortie. This capability multiplied the aircraft's tactical value and provided Allied commanders with unprecedented flexibility in air operations planning. The P-47's ground attack capabilities proved particularly devastating against German transportation infrastructure. Armed with two 500-pound bombs and 8 50-caliber machine guns loaded with armor-piercing incendiary ammunition, a single Thunderbolt could destroy locomotives, railway cars, and transportation choke points with remarkable precision. The development of skip bombing techniques allowed P-47 pilots to attack heavily defended targets, such as railway tunnels and bridges, by skipping bombs along the ground or water surface, achieving hits that would have been impossible with conventional dive bombing methods. These innovative tactics proved so effective that German transportation operations were forced to shift increasingly to nighttime hours to avoid the constant threat of P-47 attacks. The introduction of rocket armament further enhanced the P-47's ground attack lethality. The M10 triple-tube rocket launcher system, carrying M8 high-explosive rockets with the destructive power equivalent to 105mm artillery shells, provided Thunderbolt pilots with precision weapons capable of destroying heavily armored targets. Later variants equipped with 5-inch HVAR, high-velocity aircraft rockets, possessed even greater destructive capability, allowing single aircraft to engage and destroy tanks, artillery positions, and fortified structures that had previously required concentrated artillery bombardments. The psychological impact of rocket attacks on German ground forces proved as significant as their physical destructive effects, as the distinctive sound of incoming rockets created panic among troops who had learned to associate that sound with immediate mortal danger. German ground forces developed an almost pathological fear of P-47 ground attacks that manifested itself in numerous behavioral changes throughout occupied Europe. Convoy operations were increasingly restricted to nighttime hours or poor weather conditions when P-47 operations were limited. German soldiers learned to recognize the distinctive sound of approaching Thunderbolts from considerable distances, often abandoning vehicles and equipment to seek cover at the first indication of P-47 presence. Military historians noted that German troop movements became increasingly cautious and time-consuming as units took elaborate precautions to avoid detection by prowling Thunderbolts. This tactical paralysis significantly degraded German operational effectiveness and contributed to the growing mobility advantage enjoyed by Allied ground forces. The statistical impact of P-47 ground attack operations defied contemporary expectations and established new benchmarks for tactical aviation effectiveness. From D-Day through VE Day, P-47 operations destroyed an estimated 86,000 railway cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored fighting vehicles, and 68,000 trucks. These numbers represented a significant percentage of Germany's remaining transportation and logistics capability, creating supply bottlenecks that hampered German defensive operations throughout the final year of the European War. The cumulative effect of these attacks proved as strategically significant as the more publicized strategic bombing campaigns, as German military effectiveness became increasingly constrained by logistics limitations. The development of specialized ground attack tactics required P-47 pilots to master entirely new skill sets that differed dramatically from traditional air-to-air combat techniques. Low-level navigation, target recognition, and precision bombing required hundreds of hours of additional training that transformed fighter pilots into multi-role aviators. The hazards of ground attack operations proved significantly greater than air-to-air combat, as pilots operated at low altitudes within range of concentrated anti-aircraft fire while focusing on precision attacks against specific targets. Despite these increased risks, P-47 units maintained remarkably low loss rates due to the aircraft's exceptional durability and the comprehensive armor protection that shielded pilots and critical systems from ground fire. German anti-aircraft defenses evolved rapidly in response to the P-47 ground attack threat, but proved unable to effectively counter the Thunderbolt's unique combination of speed, firepower, and durability. Traditional light anti-aircraft weapons proved insufficient to stop attacking P-47s, which could absorb multiple hits and continue their attack runs. Heavy anti-aircraft guns lacked the traverse speed necessary to track fast-moving, low-flying targets, while intermediate-caliber weapons often found their fire ineffective against the P-47's robust construction. The frustration of German anti-aircraft crews, unable to effectively defend against P-47 attacks despite expending enormous quantities of ammunition, contributed to the growing sense of helplessness that characterized German defensive operations during the final phases of the war. The psychological warfare aspects of P-47 ground attack operations proved as strategically significant as their physical destructive effects. German soldiers developed what military psychologists termed Jabo fever, a stress-related condition specifically associated with fighter-bomber attacks. Symptoms included chronic anxiety, sleep disorders, and panic reactions triggered by aircraft engine sounds, even when the aircraft posed no immediate threat. Medical units reported increasing numbers of soldiers seeking treatment for combat stress disorders, specifically related to P-47 encounters, creating additional strain on already overburdened German medical services. The pervasive fear of P-47 attacks affected German military effectiveness at all levels, from individual soldier performance to strategic planning considerations. The final months of the European war witnessed the P-47's complete dominance of the ground attack role, with German forces virtually paralyzed during daylight hours by the constant threat of Thunderbolt attacks. The aircraft's ability to operate from forward airfields, conduct multiple sorties per day, and maintain high operational readiness rates provided Allied ground commanders with unprecedented close air support capabilities. The sight of P-47 formations conducting systematic destruction of German military assets became one of the most potent symbols of Allied air superiority, representing the technological and industrial advantages that ultimately determined the outcome of the European conflict. The psychological impact of P-47 Thunderbolt operations on German military personnel represented one of the most significant, yet often overlooked aspects of the aircraft's wartime effectiveness. As 1944 progressed and P-47 operations intensified across all theaters of the European war, German soldiers, pilots, and civilians developed an almost instinctive fear response to the distinctive sound of approaching thunderbolts. This psychological conditioning proved as strategically significant as the aircraft's physical destructive capabilities, creating a climate of apprehension that affected German military effectiveness at every level of operation. German military medical services began documenting a specific syndrome associated with P-47 encounters that they classified as Jagdbomber fever or fighter bomber fever. Symptoms included chronic anxiety, sleep disorders, involuntary physical reactions to aircraft engine sounds, and panic attacks triggered by the appearance of any Allied aircraft, regardless of type or threat level. Field hospitals reported increasing numbers of soldiers seeking treatment for these stress-related disorders, with many cases specifically mentioning encounters with thunderbolts or jugs as the triggering events. The pervasive nature of this psychological trauma reflected the unique combination of the P-47's intimidating physical presence, devastating firepower, and apparent invulnerability that distinguished it from other Allied aircraft. Luftwaffe pilot memoirs and post-war interviews provide compelling evidence of the P-47's psychological dominance over German aircrews. Veteran pilots who had successfully engaged Spitfires, Hurricanes, and early American fighters described their encounters with Thunderbolts in terms that emphasized helplessness and intimidation rather than tactical challenge. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, a highly decorated Luftwaffe ace, wrote in his memoirs that the appearance of Thunderbolt formations created an atmosphere of dread that affected pilot performance even before combat was initiated. This psychological impact proved particularly significant among younger, less experienced German pilots who entered combat with their confidence already undermined by stories of P-47 invincibility. The distinctive sound signature of the P-47's Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine became one of the most feared audio cues on European battlefields. German soldiers learned to distinguish the deep, thunderous roar of approaching Thunderbolts from other aircraft types at distances exceeding 5 miles, providing them with precious seconds to seek cover before attacks commenced. This acoustic warning system, while potentially life-saving for individual soldiers, created a Pavlovian fear response that often triggered panic reactions even when the aircraft posed no immediate threat. German unit commanders reported increasing difficulties maintaining formation discipline and tactical coherence when P-47s were detected in operational areas, as soldiers frequently abandoned their positions to seek shelter despite orders to maintain defensive postures. The P-47's reputation for invulnerability became legendary among German military personnel, creating a mythology that often exceeded the aircraft's actual capabilities. Stories of Thunderbolts surviving seemingly impossible amounts of battle damage circulated throughout German units, with each retelling typically embellishing the details until the aircraft assumed almost supernatural characteristics. German intelligence services attempted to counter these morale-damaging rumors by distributing technical analyses of P-47 vulnerabilities and recommended attack methods, but their efforts proved largely ineffective against the psychological impact of repeated encounters with apparently indestructible American fighters. The persistence of these invincibility myths demonstrated the profound psychological dominance achieved by P-47 operations. German ground forces developed elaborate defensive procedures specifically designed to counter P-47 ground attacks, but these measures often proved counterproductive by reinforcing the aircraft's fearsome reputation. Standard operating procedures required vehicles to maintain wide spacing, travel only during specified hours, and immediately disperse when aircraft were detected, regardless of identification. These precautions, while tactically sound, significantly reduced the speed and efficiency of German military movements, creating logistical bottlenecks that hampered defensive operations. The cumulative effect of these defensive measures represented a form of tactical paralysis that multiplied the P-47's strategic impact far beyond its direct destructive effects. The psychological warfare aspects of P-47 operations extended to German civilian populations in occupied territories, where the aircraft's ground attack missions created widespread panic and demoralization. French resistance reports documented numerous instances of German garrison troops abandoning their posts when P-47 formations were detected, leaving strategic facilities temporarily undefended. Similar reports from other occupied territories described German military personnel exhibiting symptoms of combat stress specifically related to P-47 encounters, including refusal to venture outside during daylight hours and requests for transfer to areas beyond the aircraft's operational range. These behavioral changes reflected the comprehensive psychological dominance achieved by P-47 operations across all categories of German military personnel. The development of German countermeasures against P-47 operations often focused as much on psychological factors as tactical considerations. Luftwaffe training programs emphasized confidence-building exercises designed to overcome pilot fears of engaging Thunderbolts, while ground force training included specific procedures for maintaining unit cohesion during P-47 attacks. However, these training programs faced the inherent challenge of preparing personnel for encounters with an opponent that had achieved mythical status within German military culture. The difficulty of overcoming deeply ingrained fear responses through training alone became evident in the continued degradation of German military effectiveness when P-47s were present in operational areas. By early 1945, the psychological impact of P-47 operations had become so pervasive that German military planners were forced to consider Thunderbolt presence as a primary factor in operational planning. Strategic assessments included specific analyses of P-47 operational patterns, with recommendations for timing military movements to avoid periods of maximum Thunderbolt activity. The necessity of planning military operations around the activities of a single aircraft type demonstrated the comprehensive psychological dominance achieved by P-47 operations, representing a form of strategic paralysis that contributed significantly to Germany's ultimate military collapse. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt's technical specifications represented a quantum leap in fighter aircraft design that established new benchmarks for performance, durability, and firepower throughout the aviation industry. The aircraft's massive Pratt & Whitney R2859 double wasp engine, generating 2,000 horsepower through its 18-cylinder, twin-row radial configuration, provided power-to-weight ratios that enabled sustained high-altitude operations at performance levels previously considered impossible for single-engine aircraft. The engine's air-cooled design eliminated the vulnerability to battle damage that plagued liquid-cooled fighters, as the absence of radiators, coolant lines, and associated systems meant that multiple hits to the engine compartment rarely resulted in immediate mission termination. The revolutionary turbo supercharger system that distinguished the P-47 from all contemporary fighters represented one of the most sophisticated engineering achievements of World War II aviation. The General Electric turbo supercharger, mounted in the rear fuselage and connected to the engine through an intricate ducting system, maintained full engine power at altitudes approaching 40,000 feet. This high-altitude capability provided P-47 formations with a decisive tactical advantage over German interceptors, which experienced significant performance degradation above 30,000 feet. The complex engineering required to integrate the turbo supercharger system into the aircraft's design necessitated innovative solutions for air ducting, exhaust routing, and engine cooling that influenced fighter design principles for decades to come. The P-47's armament system established new standards for fighter aircraft firepower that remained unmatched throughout the war. 8 Browning AN/M2 50 caliber machine guns, each capable of firing 850 rounds per minute, provided a combined rate of fire exceeding 6,800 rounds per minute when all weapons were operational. The total ammunition capacity of 3,400 rounds allowed pilots to engage multiple targets during a single mission, a capability that proved particularly valuable during ground attack operations where precision and sustained fire were essential. The convergence pattern of all 8 weapons created a devastating cone of destruction that could disable or destroy enemy aircraft with brief bursts of concentrated fire. Continuous engineering improvements throughout the P-47's production run demonstrated Republic Aviation's commitment to maximizing the aircraft's combat effectiveness. The introduction of water injection systems boosted engine power output for critical combat situations, while more powerful versions of the R2800 engine provided increased performance margins. The development of the bubble canopy on P-47D variants dramatically improved pilot visibility, eliminating blind spots that had plagued earlier models and providing the unrestricted vision essential for both air-to-air combat and ground attack missions. These incremental improvements, implemented while maintaining production schedules, reflected the sophisticated engineering capabilities that characterized American wartime aircraft development. The P-47's exceptional durability resulted from design decisions that prioritize pilot survival and mission completion over weight optimization or maneuverability enhancement. The aircraft's robust semi-monocoque construction, built around the massive engine mount and reinforced with strategically placed armor plating, provided protection levels that exceeded those of any contemporary single-engine fighter. The spacious cockpit design incorporated armor plating behind the pilot's seat, bulletproof windscreen panels, and self-sealing fuel tanks that could absorb multiple hits without catastrophic failure. These protective features, combined with the inherent durability of the radial engine design, enabled P-47s to survive battle damage that would have destroyed other aircraft types. The development of external ordnance capabilities transformed the P-47 from a pure fighter into a versatile multi-role aircraft that could carry bomb loads approaching those of dedicated attack aircraft. External pylons capable of supporting two 500-pound bombs, or alternatively, auxiliary fuel tanks extending the aircraft's range, provided unprecedented operational flexibility. The later addition of rocket armament systems, including the M10 triple-tube launcher and the more powerful HVAR rocket system, gave individual P-47s the capability to engage and destroy heavily armored targets that had previously required concentrated artillery bombardments. This multi-role capability maximized the aircraft's strategic value and provided Allied commanders with unprecedented tactical options. Production innovations implemented at both the Farmingdale and Evansville facilities established new standards for wartime aircraft manufacturing efficiency. The modular construction techniques developed for P-47 production allowed major sub-assemblies to be manufactured simultaneously at different locations, significantly reducing total assembly time. Quality control procedures ensured that each aircraft met rigorous performance standards despite the pressures of accelerated wartime production schedules. The successful production of over 15,600 P-47s between 1941 and 1945 represented one of the most successful aircraft manufacturing programs in aviation history, demonstrating American industrial capabilities that impressed both allies and adversaries. The P-47's influence on post-war fighter design extended far beyond its immediate wartime applications, establishing design principles that would characterize American fighter aircraft for decades to come. The emphasis on durability, firepower, and high-altitude performance became hallmarks of subsequent American fighter designs, while the successful integration of complex systems like the turbo supercharger provided valuable engineering experience for jet aircraft development. The aircraft's ground attack capabilities influenced the development of specialized close air support aircraft, with the modern A-10 Thunderbolt II taking its name and mission heritage directly from the World War II Thunderbolt. This lasting influence demonstrated the fundamental soundness of the design decisions that made the P-47 one of the most successful fighter aircraft in aviation history. The final months of World War II witnessed the P-47 Thunderbolt's complete dominance of European skies, with German air opposition reduced to sporadic, desperate attempts to challenge Allied air superiority. As VE Day approached, P-47 operations had achieved such comprehensive control over European airspace that German aircraft rarely ventured aloft during daylight hours, effectively ceding air superiority to the massive formations of Thunderbolts that patrolled every sector of the former Reich. The statistical record of P-47 operations during the final year of the European War provides compelling evidence of the aircraft's decisive impact on the conflict's ultimate outcome. The comprehensive destruction statistics compiled by the 8th and 9th Air Forces reveal the staggering scope of P-47 ground attack operations. Beyond the widely publicized totals of destroyed locomotives, railway cars, and vehicles, P-47 operations systematically dismantled Germany's remaining transportation infrastructure, creating logistical paralysis that proved as strategically significant as the more dramatic bombing campaigns against industrial targets. German military commanders interviewed after the war consistently identified the collapse of transportation systems under P-47 attacks as a primary factor in their inability to maintain effective defensive operations during the final months of the conflict. The cumulative effect of thousands of individual P-47 sorties had achieved strategic objectives that exceeded the most optimistic pre-war projections for tactical aviation effectiveness. The psychological legacy of P-47 operations extended far beyond the immediate military impact, creating lasting changes in German military doctrine and aircraft design philosophy. Post-war German aviation engineers, when developing new aircraft designs, consistently emphasized durability and defensive capabilities over the lightweight, high-performance characteristics that had defined earlier German fighters. This fundamental shift in design priorities reflected the lasting impact of encountering an opponent that combined devastating firepower with apparent invulnerability, characteristics that German designers sought to incorporate into their own aircraft. The P-47's influence on enemy design philosophy represented one of the most significant, yet often overlooked, aspects of its wartime legacy. The human cost of P-47 operations, while remarkably low compared to other combat aircraft of the era, reflected the dangerous nature of the missions undertaken by Thunderbolt pilots throughout the European campaign. The aircraft's exceptional loss rate of only 0.7% per mission demonstrated the effectiveness of its protective features and the skill of its pilots, while the aerial kill ratio of 4:6 established the P-47 as one of the most successful fighter aircraft in aviation history. These statistics, compiled from thousands of combat sorties flown under the most challenging conditions, validated the design decisions that had initially generated skepticism among pilots and military planners. The P-47's combat record provided irrefutable evidence that American aviation engineering had achieved a breakthrough in military aircraft design. The post-war service life of the P-47 Thunderbolt extended the aircraft's influence well beyond its World War II achievements, as numerous air forces continued operations with Thunderbolts for decades after VE Day. Latin American countries, particularly Peru, operated P-47s until the mid-1960s, while European NATO allies maintained Thunderbolt squadrons throughout the 1950s. This extended service life demonstrated the fundamental robustness of the aircraft's design and the continued relevance of its capabilities in the early jet age. The gradual retirement of the last operational P-47s marked the end of an era in military aviation, as the piston-engine fighters that had dominated World War II gave way to jet-powered successors. The technological innovations pioneered in P-47 development provided the foundation for numerous advances in military aviation that would define the jet age. The turbo supercharger technology developed for the Thunderbolt contributed directly to the development of turbojet engines, while the aircraft's complex systems integration experience proved invaluable in the design of first-generation jet fighters. The emphasis on pilot protection and aircraft durability that characterized P-47 design became standard features of all subsequent American military aircraft, establishing safety standards that saved countless lives throughout the Cold War period. The P-47's technical legacy extended far beyond its immediate wartime applications, influencing aircraft design principles that remain relevant in contemporary military aviation. The preservation efforts that have maintained examples of the P-47 Thunderbolt for future generations reflect the enduring fascination with this remarkable aircraft and its role in decisive historical events. Museums throughout the United States and Europe display restored P-47s that continue to educate visitors about the technological achievements and human sacrifices that characterized World War II aviation. The continuing airworthiness of several P-47s, maintained by dedicated enthusiasts and aviation organizations, provides contemporary audiences with opportunities to experience the thunderous roar and imposing presence that once struck fear into the hearts of German soldiers throughout occupied Europe. These preservation efforts ensure that the legacy of the Thunderbolt will continue to inspire future generations of aviation enthusiasts and military historians. The strategic lessons learned from P-47 operations continue to influence contemporary military aviation doctrine, particularly in the areas of close air support and battlefield interdiction. The aircraft's demonstrated ability to achieve strategic objectives through accumulated tactical successes provided a template for air-ground cooperation that remains relevant in modern military operations. The psychological warfare aspects of P-47 operations, particularly the demoralization effects achieved through sustained presence and overwhelming firepower, offer insights into the non-kinetic effects of air power that military planners continue to study and apply. The comprehensive nature of P-47 dominance over European battlefields established benchmarks for air superiority that continue to guide contemporary air power doctrine. The Republic P-47. Thunderbolt's transformation from an initially skeptical reception to legendary status represents one of the most remarkable success stories in military aviation history. The aircraft that German pilots once dismissed as a flying milk bottle became the weapon they feared most, demonstrating the unpredictable nature of technological warfare and the importance of perseverance in military innovation. The P-47's legacy extends far beyond its impressive combat statistics to encompass the broader themes of American industrial capability, engineering innovation, and the decisive role of air power in modern warfare. As the last chapter in the story of World War II's greatest fighters, the Thunderbolt's record stands as a testament to the vision, skill, and courage of the men who designed, built, and flew this remarkable aircraft into the annals of aviation history. As the final P-47 Thunderbolt sorties concluded over a defeated Germany in May 1945, the aircraft had fundamentally transformed both the nature of aerial warfare and the strategic balance of World War II. What began as an experimental design concept in 1940 had evolved into the most feared weapon in the Allied arsenal, earning the grudging respect of German pilots who learned too late that underestimating American engineering capabilities carried fatal consequences. The Thunderbolt's legacy extended far beyond its impressive combat statistics to encompass broader lessons about industrial capacity, technological innovation, and the decisive role of air superiority in modern warfare. The men who flew the P-47 Thunderbolt into combat represented the finest traditions of American military aviation, demonstrating courage, skill, and adaptability that transformed initial skepticism into legendary achievement. Their willingness to master a revolutionary aircraft that challenged conventional fighter pilot expectations reflected the innovative spirit that characterized American military aviation throughout World War II. The sacrifices made by P-47 pilots and ground crews, often operating under the most challenging conditions while facing determined enemy opposition, ensured that Allied air superiority would become the decisive factor in achieving victory over Nazi Germany. The Republic P-47. Thunderbolt stands today as perhaps the most complete vindication of American aircraft design philosophy during World War II, proving that durability, firepower, and technological sophistication could overcome traditional advantages in maneuverability and lightweight construction. The aircraft that German pilots initially mocked as unsuitable for aerial combat became the standard against which all subsequent fighter aircraft would be measured, establishing design principles that continue to influence military aviation development in the 21st century. The thunder that once announced the arrival of American air power over European battlefields has become a permanent echo in the annals of aviation history, reminding future generations of the remarkable achievements possible when human ingenuity, industrial capability, and courageous determination combine in pursuit of victory.